Hello, I'm Alexandra, and I'm doing my presentation on the history of the Pledge of Allegiance in education. So the pledge was written by a man named Francis Bellamy. He was a Christian socialist pastor. He would often go on these or hold these sermons about how Jesus was a socialist, which at the time was extremely radical. Even now, I feel like it's still pretty radical for a pastor or minister to go and host sermons about Jesus being a socialist, depending on what state you're in, right? But at this time, it was very radical. So he was forced to resign from the church because of his beliefs and because of his sermons, um, which led him to meet a magazine owner named James Upham. So James Upham owned a magazine company that called the Youth Companion that was primarily targeted towards religious youths. So together they sold the pledge, they published and sold the pledge and American flags to thousands of public schools. But why would they do that? Well, for social reform. They believed that the Pledge of Allegiance or that a Pledge of Allegiance was needed to help integrate immigrants into America, especially school-aged immigrants. So their beliefs during this time where capitalism was very prevalent, this was in the late 1800s, so the Industrial Revolution had taken off and was pretty well established. Capitalistic economy was very well established at this time, and they believed that a pledge was needed to unify Americans and create a sense of togetherness, nationalism, and patriotism. So Francis Bellamy wrote the Pledge of Allegiance and published it in Upham's magazine. Um, they specifically published it and intentionally published it on Christopher Columbus's 40th anniversary of discovering America in 1892. And I put quotes around discovering because we all know that Christopher Columbus did not discover America. There were indigenous people already here. Um, and instead, he promoted the displacement and murder of these indigenous people. However, back in 1892, people did not believe that or did not know that. And so, publishing the magazine on Christopher Columbus's 400th anniversary did really, like, that worked. That did promote a sense of patriotism to Americans. The magazine ended up selling 500,000 copies, which still holds a record for the amount of circulations in America for a magazine. And they also helped sell 26,000 flags to public schools in 1892. So, what is the issue with the Pledge of Allegiance in schools? Well, since the flag was popularized among public schools, lots of issues have came up. So even though one of these issues is the association with Christopher Columbus, a lot of people also believed that it went against their First Amendment rights for their freedom of religion. The flag also holds a lot of changing symbolization throughout the years. Part of this symbolization was in the 1920s when the KKK adopted the 100% Americanism ideology that the flag stood behind. Another issue is the hand placement before World War II. As you can see, these school children saluting the flag, which looks exactly like a Nazi salute. After World War II, it was changed to placing the hand over the heart during the pledge. Under God was not added until 1954 because President Eisenhower believed that communism was evil, and during the Cold War, Russia, being a communist country, was viewed as a godless nation, and he really wanted to make America very distinct and different from that, and he wanted to let everyone know that we are a nation of God, unlike Russia. Since the publication and the integration of the pledge in public schools, there have also been lots of lawsuits. So again, people of diverse religions have long thought the flag opposed First Amendment rights even before Under God was added in 1954. For example, in 1925, a child was removed from his home and taken from his parents, from the custody of his parents in Bellingham, Washington. I know a lot of us in this cohort did our undergrad at Western and have lived in Bellingham at one time. So this school below is the school that he got pulled from. It's called Franklin Academy now. So the child got taken from his parents for 2 years because they pulled him from school because they felt that the Pledge of Allegiance went against their religious values as Jehovah's Witnesses. They felt that the flag symbolized war, violence, and that America or school systems were asking children to promise and salute, at the time salute, that they were willing to die for their country, which they felt went completely against their religious values and went against the Bible. The school or the parents were fined $25, which in the 1920s did hold a lot more weight than it does today. But a lot of people felt that that was not punishment enough and that they should be jailed for removing their child from public school for refusing to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. After 2 years, the child was given back to custody of the parents, and the parents ended up enrolling him in private school. In 1943, the case West Virginia State Board of Education versus Barnett really changed the federal law of the Pledge of Allegiance in school because a group of Jehovah's Witnesses were expelled from refusing because they were refused to recite the Pledge of Allegiance. The parents were very angry. They felt that the expulsion was unconstitutional because they had a freedom of religion. They ended up going to court, and it ended up making it to the Supreme Court. So, and then in 1943, the Supreme Court ruled that it was unconstitutional to force students to say the Pledge of Allegiance, and because of that, it is now illegal to force any student to recite it. 46 states, however, require schools to set aside time for the pledge. Washington is one of them. However, I believe districts or maybe individual schools can be exempt from that requirement. However, not a lot of teachers are actually aware that there is a law that states that students can't be forced to recite the pledge. Because of this, in 2019, a sixth grade student was arrested. An 11-year-old child was arrested for not pledging allegiance in school. At the time of this arrest, he was being taught by a substitute teacher. The substitute teacher clearly did not know the laws and sent the sixth grade student to the principal's office. Later in court, that substitute teacher said that the reason why she called the cops was because the student was being disruptive. However, that did not hold up in court. The case was dropped because obviously it is illegal to force students to say to recite the Pledge of Allegiance, and her arresting us or wanting a sixth grade student to be arrested is insanely unconstitutional. Today, as I mentioned before, the symbolism has changed and it is continuously changing. A lot of people now associate the flag with lack of equality and freedom, stating that liberty and justice for all is hypocritical. A lot of people associate it with hatred, as the flag has been turned into a symbol for white supremacy, especially after the Black Lives Matter or the KKK, and then later the Black Lives Matter movement, when people took the flag and changed it to a Blue Lives Matter symbol that kind of stood against what the Black Lives Matter movement was fighting for. A lot of people also believe that it perpetuates the false narrative that America is the best country, and that is a narrative that has been instilled in us since the age of 5 when we go to kindergarten. Jehovah's Witnesses have long thought that this the pledge symbolized war. And some believe that the flag has changed to symbolize white supremacy, as I've talked about before. So, why this matters to me. So, when I was a freshman in high school, I felt that the flag symbolized war and the duty to die for our country, which at the time I was beginning to form these values and beginning to explore what was important to me. And I really felt a strong opposition to war. I had recently left the Christian faith and also felt uncomfortable staying under God. Freshman year of high school, during this time, I also was experiencing a sports injury where I was on crutches and it was really uncomfortable for me to stand. And so I kind of took this as an excuse and an opportunity to sit during the Pledge of Allegiance. The teacher met me with a lot of ridicule in front of the entire class. He felt extremely disrespected and went on a very long monologue about the youth these days and how my generation is insanely disrespectful to veterans and Americans and the government. Um, since then, I would stand because, being a small 15-year-old girl and like a middle aged teacher was yelling at me, I did feel some sort of obligation. So I would stand, but I would not put my hand over my heart and I would not recite the pledge. I would just kind of stand there and wait for it to be over. Um, I have obviously become more educated than I was at the age of 15, and I have recognized since then a lot of the inequalities that the flag symbolizes and the hypocrisy that the pledge speaks. Um, I believe, and a lot of other people believe, that a lot of people in this country are not free. Um, and part of this is because of the lack of accessible and affordable health care for individuals, lack of affordable housing, the growth in homeless populations across major cities. I mean, Seattle alone, from 2020 to 2024, has seen a 23% increase of homeless population that city alone, which is 16,000 people in total since 2020, which is just so heartbreaking to see. In my own, I only lived 20 minutes south of Seattle, and I go to Seattle all the time. So you see it in real time, and it's very, like, I don't see freedom in that, and I don't see liberation in that. Um, there's also a lot of inequalities historically and seen in present day among race, gender identity, sexual orientation, and with women's rights, especially after the overturning of Roe v. Wade a couple years ago. So, my relationship to this philosophy is that I, as a teacher, am teaching free thinking, diverse scholars. I would never make them stand or recite the pledge in class if they felt uncomfortable. My school that I work at does not take time out of their day or make time in the day to recite the Pledge of Allegiance, which I find really interesting. I am curious if the school that I work at is one of the schools that got exemption from the requirement. I also believe that informing students of the history and meaning is essential before forcing them to take part in something that may contradict with their values. I know, as I mentioned before, that a lot of us are forced to learn and recite the pledge as early as kindergarten, and more before we have more independent thought. Um, but I do think that it is important to add in an age appropriate way to give meaning to what they are doing. Some insights I have learned from this research presentation was the history of the pledge and why it was created, and how it was created by a socialist Christian who was pretty radical for his time, even if the meaning of it has changed in the historical context is an issue in itself. I do think that it is pretty radical that a socialist Christian wanted to create unity that challenged capitalistic ideologies and themes in America. I also learned that a large amount of the court cases were from Jehovah's Witnesses challenging um, the their right for freedom of religion and their right to not stand or recite the Pledge of Allegiance in classrooms. I was also kind of disturbed how little teachers lack or how many teachers lack knowledge of the laws in education and how it turned into an extreme of a teacher calling the police and having a sixth grade student arrested. Um, a question that I still have are schools moving away from the pledge altogether? I know my school doesn't take time out of their day to recite the pledge, and the school that I worked in previously as a para would only recite the Pledge of Allegiance one day a week, which was very different than what I experienced in my educational career. I felt, or I remember, I graduated in 2016, and I know that we had to Pledge of Allegiance to every single day, every single morning. Um, and so I'm just curious if schools are toning that down or moving away from the pledge altogether. So thank you so much for listening to my presentation. This has taken me so many tries because I am definitely somebody that like rambles or like trips over my own words when I speak. So thank you so much for watching my fourth try of recording this video. I hope you learned a lot, and next time you pledge of allegiance, you think about like what you are, like the history and like what you like the context and like what you are pledging to exactly. So thank you, and I hope you have a great day.